Okay, Bill and Joe, why did you believe an organization dedicated to early American pattern glass was important?
We were very interested when we found out there was such a thing as pattern glass. And as we got into it a little bit, and then a little bit more, we became very interested to find out that there wasn't any organization devoted to pattern glass.
It seemed like there was a group for every other kind of glass in the world, but nothing that was strictly pattern glass. So we thought, gee, there ought to be a place where people who collect this stuff can share their interests.
I did not start out being interested in pattern glass. My main interest was hand woodworking and antique woodworking tools, antique hand woodworking tools.
So I got drug off to all these tool shows and into antique shops seeking out tools. And I said, I've had quite enough of this. I want something that I can look for. Now, my mother-in-law had left us 5 pieces of patterned glass, no 2 of the same pattern. So there was a goblet I particularly liked, and I said, I'm going to find out what this is. And it turned out to be wildflower, and that's what we started with.
So that was your very first pattern then, was the wildflower.
That's right, yeah. And then I got interested in the other patterns, and then Bill thought, gee, this kind of looks like fun, and you started to collect.
I started to get interested in it. Up until then, if I saw in an antique shop a display of glass in the window, I wouldn't even go into it because I knew they probably didn't have any good antique tools. I discovered early on that general antique shops are not the place to look for tools. Most of the tools you find there are not worth buying, and most of them are not even usable. But I know now where to find tools. But by that time I'd gotten interested in glass. And how this came about is that Joe told me one afternoon when we got back from doing some general antique browsing that she thought she saw a glass in an antique shop the same as we had in our hutch at home, which had come from my mother's. Well, what was that? And Joe went and got this goblet, and we looked at it, and she said she thinks it's called some kind of flower. Well,
I don't know that I even did that, but I decided that I was going to find out what it was.
So we went to Borders bookstore and looked around for glass books that would have pictures of glass in it that maybe we could see if they had one like that. And there was a book by Jenks and Luna, Bill Jenks and
Yes.
Luna.
Before Riley.
And we looked at it there in the shop, and lo and behold, they had a picture of this, and they called it Wildflower. And so we were hooked enough to buy that book on the spot, and took it home and looked through it more, and we said, well, maybe it's got pictures of some of these other glasses, because we thought these things were one of a kind. We had no idea what this glassware was, that it had any name, or we just thought that it had come to the family in some sort of just casual way, that it was just a solitary piece of glass. I remembered these things enough to know that my mother never had any idea of what they were, and she never used them except for one occasion when this goblet had a twin at the time, there were two. And one day when I was about 12 or 14 years old, I was roughhousing with a buddy of mine in the dining room, and we rolled over into the china cabinet and knocked over a bunch of things, and the other goblet like this was
Which
broken.
is deer and dog.
Which is deer and dog,
Okay.
that we found later. So when we went through Jenks's book, we could identify the dahlia pattern. And did it have the tulip and sawtooth in it?
I don't remember for sure, but
But it-
I'd be surprised if it didn't.
And it had the deer and dog, I
Yes.
think. But it did not have this piece of glass, which was very mystifying to us because
We always thought it was fun because it's a celery vase and it has celery on one side.
by that time we knew there was such a thing as a celery. And it had this replica of a stalk of celery on it and something else on the other side. And I remember
Rose.
a rose.
Yes.
I remember eating at my grandmother's house, or when we ate at grandmother's house, she had individual salt cellars on the table, and she would pass celery around. Now, it may very well have been in that, but I can't remember what it was in. But I know I liked to get the celery and put it in that salt and eat it. I didn't have any particular fondness for celery, but it was fun to put it in there, to have my own salt cellar, because I didn't have those at home. But eventually, we found out what this pattern is, and it is very interesting.
Joyce Johnson, who some of you will remember because she was a dealer for many, many years and she had wonderful things. And I asked her one day, I said, Joyce, I have this celery vase and it amuses us because it actually has celery on one side. And she said, yes. She said, that's what I call multi-fruits. And you find it in the books often, especially the older books, with the goblet, which is strawberry and currant. But there's a whole line of tableware, and each piece has different fruit on it. So Joyce, I'm sure there were other people who called it that, but in the later books, you will see that name listed, as well as strawberry and currant, and it always has this very distinctive, I know some of you probably know what that's called, but on every piece there's always that particular decorative rim.
Well, being that each piece in the pattern has different fruit on it, it makes for a difficult job of identification. And what are some of the other names?
Well, one of the pictures is cherry and fig, one is loganberry and grape, and I don't know.
We now have, what, a dozen or more pieces in it, and they're all different.
That's kind of fun for that reason.